Hello everyone, this is Oregon Moto John, just doing a chain adjustment on a 2021 KTM 890 Adventure R. As you can see, have a little bit of sagging on my chain. I noticed last ride more than just the sagging, because it's normal for these bikes to run with a looser chain. I noticed there was a little noise. I felt it, or didn't feel it, but I could hear it hitting the chain guards when I'd accelerate out. You know, as you accelerate, sometimes there can be a little bit of slack on the bottom of the chain, because it's tensioning the top as it's pulling on the wheel a little harder. When I was coming out of a corner, and I thought, yeah, just check this out a little bit. I have 630 some miles on this bike. It's let me go past 6,000 RPM, and that's an experience. Wow, need to post a video on that later today. This bike really does go a lot quicker than I thought it did when I was short shifting it during the break-in. But anyway, chain getting a little noisy, and let's check this spec. So basically, as the little sticker here says, we want it to be 2 to 5 millimeters past this, or excuse me, roughly 25 millimeters past the end of this chain guard right here. Okay, and this is countersunk up here, the swing arm, so you got to go to the flat part of that swing arm. 29 millimeters is roughly a chain link. So 25 will get you pretty close to where you need to be. I guess if you want to be really technical, you could back the link up against that chain guard and then depress this part up. Right now, I measured it out from the top of this chain here to the top of the bottom, or the bottom of this swing arm. Not this lip, but the inner flat part of the swing arm. I'm pretty close. I'm about, I guess, 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters. So I'm on the very end of that, loose end of that adjustment. So I'm gonna go ahead and come back to my adjusters here and give it a little, maybe try half a turn on each side, and we'll see what that looks like. For reference here, I have a pencil. The pencil is roughly, number 2 pencil, 7 millimeters in width. I measured it this morning. The tip, the lead, is around 2-ish, and about midway up is around 3, and then as we get up here it's around 5, and then the full thickness of the pencil, square to square edge, is 7. So this is kind of actually nice. I can set that up in there, and it kind of gives me an idea of what I'm doing. I set it up against the swing arm and then push the chain up against it. It's kind of hard for me to measure that with a micrometer as I'm doing all that. As far as tools that you need, I have a 32 millimeter end wrench for the big nut that's on the end of the rear wheel, 13 millimeter for adjusting the brake nut here, lock nut, and then a 10 millimeter will be used for tightening and loosening the adjuster. So first thing, let's crack open the big nut over here, the 32 millimeter nut that we have. So it's just a matter of getting a big long wrench on there and loosening that up. Okay, here I am, broken loose each of the lock nuts. Now I'm going to take my 10 millimeter, and you're going to turn this counterclockwise or to the left, because you want to screw that bolt out to push on this adjuster. So we're going to give it full crank there. And I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. And what I did was I just took this and I gave it a good turn to the left. Okay, this is a tricky adjustment. I just did about 1.5 turns on each side, and now as you can see, if I compress this link here, I cannot touch my pencil, which means I am probably at 8 or 9 millimeters, because the pencil width was 7. So I'm gonna have to loosen that up. This train does like to run loose. Okay, here I am using my pencil like a feeler gauge here. So we have about one length out from the bottom of the adjuster, and if I push the pencil in all the way, it hits very easily. I can even dig into the pencil a little bit, which means there's 7 millimeters. So if I come up to where it starts to taper, there's roughly 5, and so if I push up, I can pinch that barely. So there's really the end of that adjustment. There's about 5 on the tight end. And if I pull back here, we're really not that much different from where we were, honestly. I'm slightly tighter, but there's still a sag in the chain, so, this chain likes to run loose. Make sure you get your little indexing deals, and push forward on the wheel now and then to make sure your right side block is pushed up against the adjuster before you tighten everything up, and then recheck the chain. Make sure your adjusters, there are these little indexed marks here, are the same with the little tab on the swing arm, so your wheel is straight. And that's it. That's about as tight as that chain wants to go. Hope that helps. Another tip is, clean your chain before you do all that. I cleaned my bike before I did all this a couple days ago, knowing I was going to do this. And it just makes working on a bike a lot more pleasant. And I took some WD-40 to the chain and cleaned it. Like I said, a clean chain is probably the most important thing on this stuff. Lubrication seems to be not quite as important, but clean is important. So anymore, I just make sure I clean it. Now I'll probably follow up with some kind of a low mess lube, but anymore, I think keeping the chain clean is probably the most important thing. Hope this helps. Of course, make sure you re-tighten your nut nice and snug, tight. There's a torque on that. I usually just get it basically to where it bottoms out and it's super, I don't want to say super tight, but on this axle bolt, fairly tight. I did have one come loose years ago when I didn't torque it probably as tight as I should have, and it didn't result in an accident, but it sure could have. So I'll tighten them. Sometimes I'll even make a permanent mark on the nut at the top, and then make sure that isn't backing off. I'll just check it now and then, for the first 2 or 3 or 4 rides, but it doesn't hurt just to make sure you don't have something loosening off, because if you mark the shaft and if you mark the nut at the top and then the shaft, if you see those marks misaligning, you know that you're backing off. But I've never had that problem since. So okay, there you are. Just what I was talking about on this caliper here, or measuring out a pencil, is if you measure out this thing at full width, it's like well, 6.94 millimeters, roughly 7. But if you come to where the tip was about, with the lead, was about 2, if I can get to the end of that. Of course, one-handed, this is harder than you'd think, but 2 at the tip, and then if you go up to where it starts to taper, I was getting around 5. So it was kind of nice because I could slide this up and down like a feeler gauge. It's just a pencil, and it worked really well. So if you got the pencil hitting, you're probably a little tight because it's 7. If you get where it's tapering a little bit, touching, it might be about, because that's about 5. So and that was easier for me than trying to stick that gauge up in there and measure all that out as I'm trying to push. So good luck. Hope that helps. Something I almost forgot to mention is too loose is better than too tight. So we've got that adjustment right now. I've double checked it, triple checked it. Normal adjustment on this. It looks like it has a slight sag to it. And if you get this too tight, this chain comes up and it pulls on your primary drive, and there's a seal, of course, around behind your sprocket, and it'll wear that out and make it leak, and then you'll see oil puking out down here. I had a 790 that I had the counter shaft seal replaced under warranty. Looking back, I kind of wonder if maybe I tightened my chain slightly too tight. You know what? I'm not positive because I seemed to follow a pretty similar procedure, although I wasn't quite as precise, but maybe that's why it was leaking in there. So if you see oil leaking down here, it could be a counter shaft seal. So remember, don't over tighten this. I didn't need to make a lot of adjustment back here today. If it was a very small adjustment to big influence on the chain, I had to back it off. I only did, I think, two turns, turn and a half, and it was too tight, and I had to back it off. And then I had to make sure I was centered on my blocks back here. So take your time. I had to fiddle around with this a little bit to get it right, but it wasn't hard. It just took a little fiddling. So take your time, fiddle with it, and you'll get it right. And then be sure to, you know, tighten these back on as you're tightening these lock nuts. Sometimes you have to put the 10 millimeter on here to make sure this doesn't back in as you're tightening that. So sometimes you have to hold that as you tighten that on. All right, good luck. So this is what I was talking about, where once you get your adjuster snugged up, you can just make a little tick here, you know, at the maybe two parts that line up, maybe one here, and then just maybe a little one there, just where those line up. And that way, if you see those marks spreading, you'll know that your adjuster's coming up. Actually, a little story to that is I had just gotten back from a ride, and the bike felt a little funny. It felt like the chain was grinding around a little bit, and got home, checked the tension, it was fine, and then kids came out and, you know, got busy with something else, and my buddy came over and we were talking bikes, and he said, he's like, do you think you should have an axle nut on there? And I looked, that whole axle nut had fallen off. So now I'm pretty meticulous about making sure this nut is tight. Like, again, not crazy tight, but that's a big bolt, that's a big nut. It can take quite a bit of, should feel like it bottoms out when you pull on it, and then not give it any, get to a point where it won't give you any more. And then I'll check that, especially the first 2 or 3 rides after a chain adjustment, just to make sure those marks are not moving. So anyway, just a little tip. I almost learned that the hard way. So ride safe, have fun, and keep the two-wheel therapy going. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe if this is helpful.